Hello, my name is Javed Khan, and I'm assistant professor at the Industrial Design Department at Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands. With this presentation, I would like to present you how to conduct an academic literature review. So before I present how to conduct an academic literature review, I would like us to tackle the question on why. Why should we conduct an academic literature review? I would like you to pause the video for a minute and try to answer that question for yourself. Okay, I'm sure you know you came up with many reasons on that question on why should we conduct an academic literature review. I would like to present you my favorite one, if you like. And in order to present you why should we conduct an academic literature review, I would like to go through some cases from papers or presentations that were presented in an academic context. So the gentleman that you see in this photo is Douglas Engelbart. He's the inventor actually of the mouse. He holds on his left hand the very first mouse that he invented, or one of the very first mice that he invented. And on his second hand, it is a mass prototype, a mass, if you like, production of that initial prototype. So he presented that invention of the mouse, which has become obviously ubiquitous in our interactions with interactive computing systems, uh, in Stanford, in a presentation actually in Stanford. That's Stanford University. Now, we would argue, when is the first mass production and mass adoption of that device that he invented and presented in an academic context? But I think a lot would argue that the first mass production and adoption of the mouse was with Apple's Lisa computer. This is how that mouse looked at that point in time, with one button. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the gap? What is the time between Douglas Engelbart presenting his invention in academic context and the mass adoption of the mouse by Apple's Lisa computer? What do you think is the time gap? Take a minute and think about it. Well, Douglas Engelbart presented that in Stanford University in 1968. The Apple's Lisa computer appeared in 1983. So there's a 15-year gap between Douglas Engelbart's presentation, again in academic context, and the mass adoption of his invention. Now let's take another example. This is a screenshot from a SIGGRAPH paper, again a paper from an academic context. So SIGGRAPH is a quite famous conference when it comes to computer graphics and other devices. And this is the very first presentation of multi-touch interaction. Again, this is an academic context. Again, we would argue, when is the mass adoption of multi-touch interaction in interactive computing systems? I think a lot would argue that the one good example of that is, again, from Apple, and in this case, it's the very first iPhone device. Again, I would like you to ponder and think, what is the time gap? We saw in the previous example was 15 years. What do you think is longer or shorter than 15 years? Take a minute to think about it. Well, that SIGGRAPH paper was presented in 1978. Apple's first iPhone was launched in 2007. So there is a 29-year gap, almost twice as the previous example. In another example, again taken from a screenshot from a SIGGRAPH paper, again an academic presentation that is of a paper in an academic context. This is Ivan Sutherland, a famous researcher from the University of Illinois, presenting the very first virtual head-mounted display. Actually, the story goes that the head-mounted display was so heavy that it had to be mounted in the ceiling. So imagine, this room where this device hangs in the middle of the room, and one would need to walk actually in the device to mount his or her head into the roof-mounted display. Yeah, this was presented in an academic context. Well, would argue, when is the mass production and adoption? Obviously, adoption is questionable to some extent. Some mass production has happened with the Oculus Rift. And again, I want you to think, what is the time difference between the academic presentation of a virtual reality head-mount display and the mass production of it? Well, in this case, Ivan Sutherland presented that in 1968. Well, Oculus obviously launched, mass-produced to some extent the device in 2015. So this is 47 years, and I don't think one can argue that has been massively adopted. So with the previous examples, I wanted to make was that if there is some innovative idea that you're thinking or working on or want to work on, it is right now presented in an academic conference, in an academic context, either in a conference, a journal, most probably is one of the two. So if you're looking, for an innovative concept, if you're looking at how will the future will look like 15, 30, 40 years from now, what you have to do, I would argue, is an academic literature review. So then the problem, shifts from thinking about a creative idea or a new idea, an innovative idea, to one, how to conduct a proper academic literature review. By conducting that, I would argue, one can come up with groundbreaking, potentially groundbreaking ideas that a lot of us, or maybe most of us, um, will encounter 15, 20, 30, and 40 years from today. So the objective of my presentation is to find relevant, that's relevant to your topic, and high quality literature, academic literature, that is to enrich, support, position your designs or your projects. The main practical goal is that you want to achieve with a literature review is to show that you know your field. In other words, you need to conduct an academic literature review to show that you know what you're talking about. And another practical, if you like, goal or a result of the literature review is that you, by conducting such one, you show the gap, you present a gap that motivates your work. In other words, you show what has happened in the past and what needs to happen in order for things to move forward. The output of a literature review is essentially a description, it's a document, it's a report, it's a description of several papers. And as I said, it's also essentially that description of the several papers should point to the gap that would motivate your work. Obviously, a literature review can have many more objectives, and it answers these type of questions. What is already known with respect to my subject? What theories and concepts are relevant? What evaluation methods were used? What's a user group that has been investigated? Is maybe some technical information about the system architecture. What sort of conceptual models were used in the past? More broadly, what is the outlook for the future? And more importantly, how do we build upon what's already reported. And the process is the following. It's important to realize that these are separate steps that you need to take your time to consider. So first, um, typically we start with a certain keyword, right? There is a certain topic that we're working on. We assume certain keywords about the topic. So it's about, virtual reality, and we've heard all sorts of terms such as virtual or augmented reality, VR or AR. So we're going to note those keywords. And then we feed those keywords in a specialized search engine. You probably have heard by now Google Scholar. I'm going to show you also academic from Microsoft. It's an alternative specialized search engine. And then the next step would be to review the search results and shortlist. So there we're only checking the abstract, but it's important to highlight that we're not actually going to read the papers, but what we aim to do is to create a stack of papers, a stack of relevant papers. So we just check the abstract, and here, depending on what your assignment is about, say, if you're working an assignment for a module, say, writing a report about media innovation, say you're aiming roughly for 30 papers again on your topic. And once you have kind of created that pile of 30 relevant papers, and again, it's important to kind of time box that activity because nowadays there are millions and probably hundreds or thousands of relevant papers in your topic. It's important to kind of set a certain time and aim, to say roughly aim for 30 papers. Obviously, uh, number that number of papers will change depending on what your objective is. If you're writing a thesis for your master, probably this number is higher. If you're writing something, a shorter paper, for an assignment, probably this number is roughly 30. And once you have kind of piled those 30 papers, then you look through those papers a little bit more carefully. Again, you're not reading the whole paper from A to Z, but you're rather scanning through the results, the conclusions, and you're trying to then create a shorter list, say, 15 papers. So you want to get rid, say, of half of the papers in your pile. And then you have your 15 papers again. I'm assuming an assignment, say, on a say a few weeks assignment on a master's course, and then you actually read those say 15 papers that you've short listed, and then you review them and you write a short description about what are their common points and maybe where do they differ, and you include them in your proposal or paper or whatever your objective is. So now when it comes to the type of academic literature that's out there, now, typically, I would classify them in three categories, into books and book chapters. And in most cases, this type of literature reflect well-established knowledge. That means that obviously, there are books that are hundreds of years old, but typically, when it comes to science and technology, we're looking at uh, knowledge that is well established. That means it has been researched time and again, and it is say roughly 2 to 5 years old. Obviously it can be much older than that. The good thing about this type of literature is that it's well established knowledge, so we can be rest assured that it's kind of widely accepted by the community, and it's reliable and valid. On the downside, it might not reflect the most newest trend or the newest finding when it comes to that domain that you're looking at, that topic that you're investigating. So there is where the second type of academic literature is, and that is journals. So in most cases, journals reflect thoroughly performed research. So this is typically, researchers will work, 1 to 3 years, in I think for all, at least, the journal papers that I have published, typically, it was a 2-year-old uh, effort in order to get that work published in a journal. So on the one hand, the journals obviously, that are the ones that are published this year, will be the obviously new, to the domain, to the topic, and they would reflect thoroughly performed research because also the peer review process takes quite some time in order to get the paper up to the standard that the well-established journals at least have. And the final category of academic literature that you're going to find with the literature search is conference proceedings. So this is the most recent research. Again, obviously, uh, uh, I would refer, to a conference that happens, obviously, this year or the previous year. Typically, conference proceedings are published annually because conferences happen annually. And this is typically, more recent research, and typically it's research that takes 6 months, to a year, and would reflect something which is newer and maybe more innovative also, a more innovative direction, a more innovative study, a more innovative research that probably needs to be investigated more thoroughly in order to be well established. Now, there are also all sorts of other news sources, and by news sources, I do not mean the popular public broadcasters such as BBC and CNN, but there are more specialized when it comes, to science and technology. There are more popular ones such as The Verge or Engadget or Wired, but there is also, MIT has its technology review, Reuters has a special broadcasting service when it comes, to technology, and there are many more. But typically, we're not looking at this type of sources. Typically, we're looking to finding books or book chapters, journals, and conference proceedings. Now, one issue that some of my students come across is they think of certain keywords, again, based on their topic and the domain that they're working, and then they use those keywords into specialized search engines such as Google Scholar, and they come back to me and they tell me, you know what, I looked for academic papers, but I couldn't find any in the in this domain that I'm working on. So the thing that I then realize at this point in time is that they haven't actually used the right keywords, because it's really impossible, nowadays to be unable to find any relevant academic literature when it comes to literally any topic. So that means that if you don't find relevant, or you find, you have difficulty finding relevant academic literature, existing academic literature, that is, it means that you need to cross-check your keywords and you need to rethink the keywords that you use. So for that, you can look at either established classification keywords, as they're known by organizations such as the ACM. So ACM has, if you like, already thought of a classes of keywords. So they're typically, and then when it comes to uh, papers that are published by ACM, this would include those classification keywords. So one way to go about it is to look at those classification keywords that ACM has. And if you find a relevant paper, typically, again, that relevant paper will include what's known as author keywords. And so these are, some keywords that the authors used. So if you find that paper, relevant, then maybe you want to look at the keywords that the authors have used. So they might be slightly different. Just to give an example, so you might be thinking of mobile technology, whereas the keywords used in academia is ubiquitous computing or pervasive computing. And if you find now a very relevant paper, you want to check next what's the future work that it's referring to. So typically a paper will also list future work. So these are um, things that the researchers thought of, but they haven't had the time to investigate yet. So this might be a good source of inspiration for you to conduct a study or some work. And you would also want to check its reference list. Right? Again, every academic paper has a list of references, so this is highly relevant work that those authors have included in their paper. Also, what you're looking at is whether this is a main source. So whether this is a highly cited paper and well established in the field. It's important to have such a main source paper to also show that you know what you're talking about. So in order to establish your expertise, you want to refer back to what I would call a main source paper, or few main source papers that are highly cited and well established knowledge. And you want to have more of what I would call up-to-date papers. So these are, much more recently, much more recently published papers. Now, when you have actually fed your keywords, hopefully, these are the right keywords, and you've got a list of papers back from a search engine, but you might have trouble actually getting the file, the article that is from the search engine. So actually getting that PDF file, this is what I mean. So if you have trouble finding the actual PDF file, what you want to do, probably, the first thing that you want to do is to check whether you have a university IP, whether you have connected with a virtual private network, that is, because typically universities, at least in the Netherlands, have subscriptions to online libraries. It's only that those online libraries check your IP, the IP that you're connecting to their site. And if you're working outside the university and you have not connected to the university's virtual private network, you're not going to have a university IP. Therefore, that digital library is not going to recognize your IP and not give you access to the PDF file. So I would say, that's probably, the first thing that you need to do. Now, if also that doesn't work because, for example, the university or your department does not have a subscription to that particular journal or library, what you want to do is to visit the researcher's website or his or her ResearchGate page. Nowadays, there are more and more researchers putting up their original source file on their website or on their ResearchGate profile page. So you might be able to find actually the PDF on those two sources. If also that doesn't work, typically there is a corresponding author, as is known in each paper, and typically the journal or conference proceeding or even the book is going to include the email of the researcher. So you could email directly the researcher. I have certainly received such emails in the past. And also, if that doesn't work, then you can always uh, um, request that particular paper from your library. Typically, they should be able to provide it to you, but I would do that last. Now, when it comes obviously to criteria for you to find papers, obviously then they need to be related to your topic. So if it is about, say, virtual reality or mixed reality, they need to relate to that. And we're looking at, as I mentioned also previously, to academic sources only and not any news sources. Now, once we have a list of papers, obviously, the next question which is raised is how good is this publication? In other words, what's the quality? And here, there are several criteria that you could look at. So one is citations. That's a golden standard, but obviously it implies that the paper has been published in the past. Obviously, a paper which is maybe an influential, a potentially influential paper, which is published, this year, obviously it's not going to have any citations or very, very few citations. And obviously a paper, that was published 20 years back might have a lot of citations, but then it might be obsolete. So the citations is one criteria that you would need to look at. The second criteria is the venue that this paper has been published. So there are certain conferences that have a high reputation, also certain publishers or libraries that publish that content um, that have a certain reputation. So here I list a few when it comes, to human-computer interaction, which is, also the topic of my research. So ACM is stands for the Association for Computer Machinery. It is a large international organization which hosts a lot of conferences, academic conferences, and typically, the quality of the papers published there is high. So some in my field, so some conferences is the CHI, pronounced the Sky Conference. That's the Computer Human Interaction Conference. That's the flagship, if you like, conference of ACM. And then there are more specialized and smaller ones, such as the DIS, Designing Interactive Systems, the CSCW, Computer Supported Cooperative Work Conference. And there are conferences also by other organizations. For example, one that I'm interested in is Triple AI's HCOMP conference, and there are conferences that are organized by other organizations such as the IEEE. And when it comes to publishers, two famous ones is Elsevier and Springer. So typically, again, this is a rule of thumb, so it might not apply for all of the publications of these conferences or publishers, but typically, if you see those names of the publishers or organizers of conferences, they are a guarantee of the quality to some extent of the paper. Then obviously comes the institute that published it. So when it comes to mixed reality, the University of Illinois has a long tradition. Or when it comes to tangible interaction, our university, that's the Eindhoven University of Technology, has a history. Has several publications and many people working on it. So if then you're working on tangible interaction, and there is a paper that has been published by our university, that's Eindhoven University of Technology, then obviously, that would be one, again, guarantee, if you like, of the quality of the paper. Then typically, obviously, you're looking, and all of these typically venues are peer reviewed, so it must be peer reviewed. And you also want to look at the authors. So if there is a very well established and famous professor in the field, and he now is publishing a new paper, uh, obviously that is an important quality criteria. Now, to give you some more specific sources, again, these are specialized on when it comes to human-computer interaction. When it comes, to relevant journals, the International Journal of Human-Computer Studies is one, and here's the link. Behavior information technology is another one. Computers in human behavior. These are, if you like, broader journals when it comes to the topic of human-computer interaction. More specialized are the computer-supported cooperative work. If you're looking at the use of computers to support collaboration and cooperation, and personal and ubiquitous computing publishes typically work that would be classified as mobile computing or IoT. Now, when it comes to specialized resources, and search engines, you probably know Google Scholar, and you probably do not know Microsoft's academic research. So I'm going to demo both of them in a follow-up slide. Other ones that you probably do not know but are important ones is ACM's digital library, which can be found in this URL, dl.acm.org. Again, this and IEEE's Expert Digital Library. These are publishing particularly work on computer science and technology. Now, researchers and academics are a special niche group, and they have also their own special social networking site. So you might also want to subscribe yourself and look at profiles of researchers and look for papers also at their own social networking site, which is researchgate.net. There are more, but I believe this is the most popular one. And finally, if you're working with others, you would also want to have a look at those tools, which would help you know to collaborate with, if you're doing that literature review with more than one in a group, then you would like to probably have a common, a joint library and add notes and make it easier to create a reference list. So these tools, Zotero, Mendeley, would help you with that. Now, when it comes to relevant conferences, again, the are related to human-computer interaction. SIGCHI is the CM's organization that organizes those conferences. So it's the CHI and CSCW conference, and there are more specialized ones such as the user interface software technology, intelligent user interfaces, tangible and embedded interaction, mobile HCI, recommender systems, UBICOM and DIS. So these all have their niche, and this is the flagship conference. So when it comes, to collaboration through computers, then CSCW is the conference. If your topic is about collaboration through computers, CSCW is the conference that you should be looking at. If you're looking at mobile computing, then probably mobile HCI and UBICOM are the conferences that you should be looking at. If you're looking at tangible interaction, TAY is the conference that you should be looking at. If you're looking at more technical conferences about developing and if you like, the technical side of software technology and user interfaces, probably UIST and IUI are the conferences that you should be looking at. And, focuses on human computation, crowdsourcing. So there's a conference which is called Human Computation. It's organized by AAAI, and this is the link of the conference. Now, nowadays, obviously, you have very large and wealthy companies that can afford their own research labs. So typically, all of this research is published by universities, but nowadays, and probably in the last decade or two, there are companies such as Google, Microsoft, HP, Intel, Facebook, eBay, and other companies who also have researchers working on typically again computer science and human computer interaction topics, and they typically are going to list their publications in their own websites. So this is a list of lab research lab websites that research lab groups that publish their work under those sites. Now, practically, one exercise that you can do to find uh, relevant academic work would be the following. Take, 15 minutes to think about keywords. Maybe also check, online whether these are the right keywords. These are the keywords that people are using. I'm also going to show you how specialized search engines can help you in doing that. Then what you want to do in the second stage, which is going to take 45 minutes, you want to create that pile. You want to create a pile, say, of 30 papers that are relevant, again, based on the keywords. And again, you are not actually reading those papers, but you're just looking at the title and the abstract, probably also looking at the authors and the keywords. And you want to pile, say, 30 to 50 papers. And then once you have created that pile, you want to spend, say, 1 more hour to more carefully check that paper, where you want to scan the results and conclusions, and you want to create a shorter list, say of 10 to 15 papers. And then you actually review and you report the findings of that of those 10 to 15 papers, and you include them in your proposal or paper or work. So a comment on reading. So when you actually read the paper, this is not the image that I envision you doing. So the image that I envision is that what you're actually performing is known as active reading. And active reading simply means reading something with the determination to understand and evaluate it for its relevance to your needs. So you're not lying down, with that academic paper and casually reading it. So you want to take notes, for example, and underline or highlight keywords and phrases as you read. You want to make annotations in the margin to summarize points, raise questions, or challenge what you've read. Maybe make links to other papers that you've just read. Another tip would be to test yourself by reading for half an hour, putting the text away, and summarizing key points from your memory. Another point when it comes to active reading is to explain what you've read to someone else, or to even record yourself or your notes and listen back to that recording while you're traveling or doing household chores. All these tips I've taken from the Open University in UK, and more of those tips and what active reading actually is, you can find in this URL. Now, I would like to show you a demo, if you like, to show you an example of how to use Google Scholar and how to use Microsoft's Academic. So say, I'm interested in, actually have made the video already, so I'm just going to pause it for a minute and explain. So you see, once I access Google Scholar, and given, that I already have a profile in Google Scholar, you see that Google Scholar immediately even recommends articles for me. So if you don't have a profile in Google Scholar, I would advise you to do that, because if you do that, then you get relevant articles without even searching for them. So that's, I think, one nice um, feature of it. So say, I'm interested in mixed reality, and then, I obviously, insert those keywords, and I see a list of papers here, a list of titles of papers. Here is a part of the abstract. I see, some authors, where it was published and when it was published. You see that also conveniently, if the PDF is found by the search, and is also listed here. So one, as I said, quality criteria is to see, how many people have referenced it. So here you see the reference number of the different papers which are listed. And here, here it's an interesting feature. Let me move the video back for a minute. So here is an interesting feature that Google Scholar has. So here you see uh, relevant other related uh, keywords, search keywords. So you want to have now a closer look, because academics again might use different keywords for the same or similar topic. So this is another nice feature of Google Scholar. So say, I'm interested, so I see, that this is a relevant paper. I can have a quick look at the PDF. I see, a very famous professor from the University of Toronto when it comes, to mixed reality. So this looks like a good main source paper. It is published in 1994, but it seems to have been cited from a lot of people. So he seems to be a key figure. So by going to his profile and clicking on the year, I can see some latest work that he has published. Now, to find other relevant work to mixed reality, I could just click on the number of people that have cited it, and there I'm gonna get a list of those 4,000. So you see, that if I would click, I'll move the video back for a minute. What I did here is I clicked on that link, and then I get those 4,704 papers. By the way, you see that the mixed reality keyword yielded more than 3 million articles. Obviously, not all of them are related to mixed reality, but a lot of them are. So it's obviously impossible to go through 3 million articles. It's even impossible to go through 4,000 articles, even for a master or even a PhD thesis. So even if I would shortlist those 4,000 articles, there are still a lot of them. So again, depending on my needs, I would like to probably filter those 4,000 articles and look at only the last ones. Say the ones that were published in the last 4 years. Well, if I do that, I get a shorter list of 1,800 papers. Well, this is still a lot, especially if you're doing an assignment for a master's program. So again, if your goal is to find, the most recent work on mixed reality, then you want also to shortlist from the last 2 years, and then you get a 600 papers, which again, there's still a lot, but it would be doable to probably go through them in a few minutes. Now, this was a quick demo of Google Scholar. Just also want to show you an alternative, which is Microsoft's Academic. So here I'm going to insert the same keywords that I did. And you see that I get a slightly different list. So the first article is not the same that I got, but the article that I got in Google Scholar, the taxonomy of mixed reality, is in the first 5. Another nice feature of the search engines is that I can see top authors, so people who are famous on the topic working on that. I can also see a different publication, so I could filter according to publication types. This I think is a really nice feature. So here I want to look only for conference proceedings, or I can even shortlist and filter through the top conferences. Say the CHI conference, and here the papers that are then listed are only from that CHI conference. Here there is also a list of parent topics, so this might be also interesting to look at when it comes to alternative keywords. So this was a quick demo of 2 search engines, and I hope by this presentation I have shared with you the steps for conducting an academic literature review, and I've also given you some tips for finding relevant and high quality literature to enrich, support, or position your design or papers or whatever other academic work you're doing. And thank you for your attention.